All right, bam, it's 12 o'clock already. It's nuts. Okay, let's get started. Webinar time. So, hi, my name's Ashley Lang. I'm from the Engagement Specialist team at HR on Board. I'll be your host for today's webinar. And we have our CEO, Peter Forbes, joining us to run through some really interesting stuff. Say hi, Pete.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Cool. It was nice to put a bit of makeup and a nice top on for this. So you're welcome.
I'm glad you did, Ash.
Someone had to.
Oh, that's right.
Cool. So thanks everyone for joining us. I can still see we've got a couple of people jumping on as we speak. Just to give you a bit of an idea, we've got a really interesting topic today and something that is super relevant right now, how to re-onboard your workforce after COVID-19. It's something that we need to go through today, and Pete will run you through a couple of things, ideas, examples and stories around how to re-onboard with the formalities, so change of position, hours, JobKeeper, etc. But just as importantly, or even more importantly, the re-engagement side. So mental health checks, tailoring things to workforce, returning in different stages, all while making sure that you're doing it in a really authentic way. So we'll get Pete to run through that. But before we do, a couple of housekeeping things to run through. First of all, you'll see that on your menu bar, you've got a Q&A. So please feel free to jump in with any questions that you have regarding the webinar. Pete and I'll sort of jump in and answer them as we go. If there's anything left over or anything that's worth a bit of a chit chat, I'll corner Pete and we'll answer them at the end and go through it all. So let's kick it off. I'll hand over to yourself, Pete.
Thanks, Ash. I was muted, so I will be now unmuted. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for attending our webinar today. Today's a bit of an interesting one that obviously has come up during these times of these kind of interesting and unusual times that we're living in at the moment. And it's about re-onboarding employees. And you kind of might ask yourself, well, what is this term re-onboarding? And I guess it's come about because what we're seeing, and also based on a lot of organisations who are our customers, it's reorientating people to the changed workplace that they're coming back into. So as some of the restrictions are now being lifted, what we've seen is there's a lot of orgs who have either stood down their workforce, paused their workforce, or they're working from home, like like a lot of white collar workers, like ourselves, for example. So it's been a really changing time. But now, as the restrictions are loosening a bit, there's a shift now to what's coming back into the new normal and what that looks like. For other workers who have, the essential workers like healthcare and education, they've had a major shift or focus during this pandemic, and now they need to resettle back into some sort of normalcy. So what we're seeing is a lot of organisations are building onboarding programs, and I'll use that term loosely, for their workforce, because COVID's kind of changed the rules about how they return to work. And what we see is there's a lot of parallels with the onboarding journey, and today's webinar is really to look at sharing some of those insights about how you can restructure or structure your onboarding journeys or your re-onboarding journeys, some content ideas that we're getting from our customers, and share with you a little bit about what we're seeing out there. Things that are particular to the COVID situation. So we'll dive into some topics that really need to be addressed in this area. And then we'll also show you what we're doing in HR on Board to assist you with some of this, really about disseminating information out to your workforce, and also some of more of those procedural things like official notifications to employees, things around, change of employment status, or JobKeeper, which has been a really big one. One of the challenging things about preparing your workforce to return is that not only does this look different from an organisation to organisation level, but it's also different for different cohorts of employees you have in your workforce. So, you know, you might have some white collar workers, but you've got people out on the road versus people in a more industrial setting. So again, like onboarding, there's a lot of parallels that you need to personalize this experience, not just at a org level, but down at a role or a location level. So some of you may have seen our COPE methodology when it comes to onboarding, and really it's a kind of cute sort of acronym to remember what are the types of categories of content or activities that you need to include in a good onboarding program. And we've split them down into kind of cultural activities, which is a lot about understanding the organization, understanding the particular area that you're working in, and that might be vision, values, and rituals and terminologies that you use. The second category is around objectives. And again, there's kind of like a pyramid scale to this because it starts at the company, but it then cascades down to the team, the role, and you as an individual in terms of your career path and objectives. Administration category is massive in onboarding, and also in this re-onboarding, there is a lot of administrative pieces that we've seen HR teams just being so busy with. And again, JobKeeper is probably the biggest example of that. And finally, but not last, is teams, and how do you integrate people and build team relationships, including with their direct reports, is really important. So we built this kind of tapestry around new hires, and you'll see it in this slide here about, here's a summary of all the individual elements that make up a really good onboarding journey. And a lot of this can be applied to the re-onboarding journey for your workforce. And, the first day might not be as hard and fixed as it is for a new hire, but it's still, that first day might be, for example, for people who are working from home as they're coming back into the workforce or coming back into the office, what does that look like? But you can use, what we've seen is our customers are using these kind of categories to structure some of their re-onboarding programs. But there's a little bit more to it, I guess, than those normal onboarding challenges. This COVID era or pandemic, however you want to call it, there's a whole bunch of other considerations that you need to consider. So, working with our customers, we probably work with I think we're over 200 organisations around Australia and New Zealand, and they span all industry sectors. So, we see everything from government, finance, through to education, retail, hospitality, aged care, all across the board. So it's a really good cross-section to get an understanding how organisations dealing with, engaging with their workforce throughout this period. So probably the biggest area to attack first is the uncertainty about what this new normal looks like. Most people don't like change and uncertainty in the best of times, and during COVID, that's kind of become the norm. Like really, even at a government level, the government's kind of treating each week as a new experience, a new challenge, and they're very cautious to make sure they're not promising too much in the future, and they're saying, look, anything we do, we may need to roll back. And I think at an organisation level, that's pretty much the best you can do for your workforce as well. But it's really important that we've seen to be transparent to your workforce to say, this is what we know right at the moment, but things can change a lot. And so that authenticity is really important when you're disseminating information out to your workforce. A lot of the answers aren't going to be there, but you're transparent about that. What we found is, telling them what the new normal looks like in terms of change to health and safety procedures, what policies they need to accept, or what practices are going to change, and we'll go into that a little bit more. But also, sending out information that requires formal acceptance for your workforce. One of the things the Australian government's done is the Safe Work Australia site, which is a really good resource in terms of having that baseline of information and content that you might need to send out to your workforce. We mentioned admin as part of that COPE categories, and what we've seen during this crisis is as the government's made a lot of changes to stimulus packages, it's created a lot of work for HR in the back office. One of the big pieces we've seen is around official employee updates, be that a change in employment status, change in working conditions, or stand down notices, and also JobKeeper. So one new feature that we introduced into HR on board probably late last year or early this year was what we call our letters workflow. And basically, this I guess is a more structured and formal way to communicate official actions to your workforce, where you need to send them out a communication, like say it's a change in status. You may need to collect some information from that employee, and you need a formal acknowledgement or recognition back from that employee. So that's something usually, an email and a mail merge from an Excel is not going to give you that visibility, and not going to give you that audit trail of what actually happened. So we've now, we adapted our letters workflow when the JobKeeper requirements came out. Everyone will be familiar, there's an ATO form that is required to send to your employees for them to acknowledge that they're not, claiming JobKeeper, or they're not on JobKeeper from another employer, or they're not doing JobSeeker. So we found this letters workflow really effective in communicating out those changes. So far, on behalf of our customers, I think we've sent out over 10,000 letters to employees, and it's been a massive game changers for some of those HR departments that would have had to do that manually, and it's allowed them to focus on some of the messaging and other components. Another piece in disseminating information out is using a feature we released just recently called Broadcasts. And that's part of our employee journey feature, where for new hires, we push information out to new hires over their onboarding experience, whether that's their first 6 weeks or 6 months. With Broadcasts, it's allowed organisations to author different types of content, whether that's videos, imagery, or links out to other sites, but they can author and schedule out that different types of content, and then they're able to target different cohorts of employees, either by job or location, job type or location, and they can schedule those content to go out at specific days or specific dates, and then they can report on what content is either more engaging for their audience. They can tell what people are caring about and what they don't care about. With Broadcasts, you can also send out feedback mechanisms, and we'll talk a little bit more about feedback as a way of re-onboarding as well. The other big consideration is the learning and reskilling part. And there's been some really amazing stories of businesses retooling and reskilling to provide services and products that are now required. Some of these businesses have seen a significant drop-off in their core offering, while others are helping to meet demand. A couple of examples I like is the Four Pillars Gin Distillery, which is close by to where our HR on board offices are out near the Yarra Valley. They're now making hand sanitizer instead of gin to cope with the demand in hand sanitizer. The other one, I'm a big rev head, but the V8, so I'm missing the motorsport at the moment. But, you know, a lot of the V8 supercar teams and the Formula One teams have, you know, retooled because they're used to making specialty equipment for the automotive industry. They're now making PPE equipment. So there's a whole bunch of examples of organizations reskilling their core services. So, you know, it's important when you're talking about bringing employees back, that may be you may be changing what you're now focusing on, and how do you get out and reskill those employees in this content. It may be that you're now coming to a close with what you had diverted some of your workforce to. And again, when you're thinking about building that re-onboarding program, you need to consider, you know, what are these people now going to be doing in the post-COVID era? Workplace flexibility is a big one that you need to consider, and I've seen a lot of survey results from organisations and larger polls that are going around, and it's pretty clear that you know, there's a lot of questions about how employees are coming back to work, and what we're seeing our customers doing is you know, allowing employees some flexibility, because, you know, people are homeschooling their children. I know that if you look over here on my camera, one of my kids is over there doing his schooling at the moment in the same office as I am doing this webinar. You know, you've got employees who have fear of getting back to work if they're using public transport. They might have some pre-existing health conditions that they're worried about. So when you're engineering your sort of content plan about re-onboarding, you need to take these into consideration. We wanted to run a quick little poll, and just because it's really interesting. We'd be interested in the people in this webinar, how they've approached flexible working, and would they prefer it in the future. So I'm just going to run this little poll. Yep. So hopefully you can see that poll on your screen, and just be interesting to see with our audience today, who'd prefer flexible working arrangements in the future. So I'll just give that a few more seconds while hopefully you can see it up on your screen, and I'll share the results as well.
I can see where this is going already.
I think so. And I think this is massive for organizations. You know, definitely just, you know, personal anecdotes. You know, I've spoken to people who were having 3-hour commutes to work, and now instead of getting up at 5:45 each morning, they're getting up at 7:45. But they've got 3 hours of their life back, while they're still feeling that they're fairly productive. It's not that people, what we've seen is, it's not that people want to work from home full time, but they want that flexibility. So I'll share that result because we've had a good insight. So hopefully you can see that result, and yeah, it's pretty overwhelmingly supportive of people would like flexible arrangements. Ash, you're a new mum, or a new mum-ish, who's come back to work early this year, straight from maternity leave into the COVID. You went hot, you know, you didn't even return back to the office.
Nope.
How has returning to work from mat leave into a pandemic been for you?
Yeah, definitely not what I pictured my first week being. I think it was day one, I was given my laptop and turned around and came on back home. So it's definitely a really weird way to return, and I was ready to socialise and have coffees and adult conversations and maybe get a little dressed up again after a year at home. But I guess there are a lot of things. There's the normal return to work parent juggling stress that I'm learning about right now. Yep. But I think returning to work in a pandemic adds these additional stresses that you didn't expect. So job security, you know, it's not just myself and my husband now, we've got a little one. Do I still have a job? Luckily, I was someone that did. I guess also things like childcare. Is it going to stay open? And if it does, do I feel comfortable sending my little fella there? Then you've got the guilt of safety and health of your family.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty that went on, but also just the mental struggle of being home 24/7. I agree with the poll. I like the idea of flexibility and being able to work remotely, but when it's not your decision, I guess I'm a bit of a rebel. I like it to be on my terms. So it's definitely been a little bit of a change, but some of the silver linings are definitely I haven't had to travel as much, more time with my family, transitioning slowly into coming back to work, and definitely had a lot of support from the team. I've got a little plant that I was sent for my home office just to freshen it up. You can see my background. I've got gorgeous bright green walls, so it's nice to look at a plant instead, as well as a fruit basket. So many check-ins. I mean, people in the business that I don't work with day to day were checking in on me and just welcoming me back, and being a bit of a natural extrovert, I was really wanting to come back and see everyone, but I haven't felt like I'm missing out with all of the connection that we've had at H Board. So it's been pretty cool, but still such a weird time to return.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think people who are office workers are in a lucky position that even though they have to work from home, the way they work is quite different to health or education or retail, who are a lot more on the front line, and they're dealing with a lot of public coming through their doors as well, which is quite different to office workers who are seeing the same people. So trying to adapt some of your re-onboarding programs to different cohorts is really important. And into our next section about connection, about how are your employees connecting and keeping that company culture is really important. And there's you've probably seen a whole bunch of different ways you can do that, like Ash mentioned, care packages. We do a lot of little catch-ups via Zoom or other methods. We have a Friday town hall that everyone gets together, and we update the whole community. So that communication piece is really important. We've replaced our team Friday lunch with a Uber Eats lunch, so we can basically pay for everyone's lunch still on a Friday, but they order what they want, but they come together virtually to eat that lunch. Digital communities, as you've probably seen, have been a big important piece in a lot of organizations' communications. And again, when you get away from the white collar workers, if it's retail, if it's different things, we've seen some of our customers use Facebook groups as a really cheap and easy hack to keep people connected. Obviously, there's things like Zoom, Slack, and Microsoft Teams have been huge in a lot of organizations. And it's been one of the interesting sort of outcomes of this has been seeing the attitudes change, particularly amongst executives and CEOs about, will my business still survive in a remote era? And I think overwhelmingly the results have been yes. We judge employees by their output, not by the time they spend at a desk. So I think there's been a lot of digital platforms that have proved their worth and have been rapidly adopted in these eras. One of our customers, Flybuys, CEO, has been in news a little bit. He was in the latest AFR magazine talking about how he lifts their team spirits. They find people who might play an instrument, so you get an insight into people's personal life. And I think this is really important, sharing that human side and sharing that everyone is suffering the same effects from the CEO down, in terms of the challenges of juggling family with work. And some are, humanizing some of that side is really important when you're building some of your re-onboarding programs. I saw one I don't think it was the CEO of Flybuys, but the CEO's wife was reading bedtime stories to the employees' children, which seems a little bit weird, but hey, if it works for some people, it's good. Mental health is a big challenge during this pandemic, and understanding what you can do to help. And again, when you're developing your programs, if you've got things like EAP programs, any other little hacks like recharge days where you give people ability to take some time off. A lot of organizations are now doing a lot around yoga, mindfulness sessions. They're sending out reminders to join into some of those. The other thing we've found as well is just reaching out to people who live alone is really important, particularly if depending on sort of the age cohort of your workforce. If you've got a lot of people who live by themselves, it's important to create those social connections and make sure they're not isolated, and give them tools and options there to break that isolation. A big part of any onboarding program and a re-onboarding program is gauging the pulse of your people in these important times. We've just run that quick poll in this webinar and look at the overwhelming support for flexible work arrangements. So it's really important. And again, in the programs our customers are setting up, we've seen a lot of feedback take place because the mood does change, and as there's a constant change of information, it's a good idea to keep having those touch points of little pulse surveys to gauge how people are feeling. Spend Less Shoes is one of our long-term customers, and like a lot of retail, they've been affected by the pandemic as well. And they've sort of put together, Alana from Spend Less has kindly shared some of the details they're doing about how they're responding to the pandemic and what their re-onboarding strategy is. And really they had a bit of a three-stage project in this. And first of all, obviously they had to respond to what was coming on. And what they actually did was they did a company stand down. They've got, over 200 retail outlets around Australia. They're a business that operates on pretty thin margins anyhow in the retail space. So they basically stood down their workforce and tried to hibernate the business during the worst of those COVID weeks. The second phase, though, is what they called preserve. And part of that is really this onboarding or re-onboarding engagement where they had regular communication out to the team. Was the most important part of their business because like a lot of businesses, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and they want to make sure the people who did work for them aren't going to go somewhere else later, because it's really important that they have a quick ramp up. So they were sending out regular emails to the teams. They were doing a CEO weekly catch-up video, which is still ongoing. They've provided COVID-19 fact sheets and resources, information about accessing superannuation early, and mental health services. So they're really providing that support to team members if they had any concerns or queries. They were also providing a direct phone line to train team members if they have any mental health concerns. And finally, their third step was about the future. So they've uploaded a lot of policies and procedures about how to trade safely once stores have opened, because obviously that's really important. They've sent out care packages to stores that are opening, which include, cleaning supplies, social distancing signage, and PPE equipment. Obviously, they're following government guidelines to ensure it's safe, so they're leveraging back to that Safe Work Australia site. Other things, they've been negotiating commercial leases, and they're supporting team members to return to work, depending on their circumstances and how they're feeling. And again, this is really important because everyone has lots of different opinions and different feelings about returning back. to work. And most importantly, Alana's saying this isn't a set and forget strategy. Every day new issues arise and they need to address them. So they're on track to have at least 100 of their stores open this week, and that's a really great effort to again get the economy going and to give their workforce some security in their jobs. So that's something, and I want to thank Alana for sharing that, because I think that's really great to see that practical example there. So we're nearly at the end of our webinar. We're at 12:30. We like to run on time. So I guess the key takeaways from today is keep engaging with your workforce. It's so important. COAT is a good framework to remember the type of categories you need to cover. You need to cover the culture. You need to cover objectives about staff and the organisation. There's a whole bunch of administration that you need to take care of. And finally, there's that team component, keeping people connected to the team. There's a lot of work to prepare for a new way of working, but it's important to share with your staff that the answers aren't there yet, but as they emerge, you'll respond and engage with that. And finally, using something like, a tool like HR Onboard, you can use HR Onboard to send those official updates or those pieces where you need the employees to respond and you need to keep track of that. But you can also use things like our broadcast feature to send out content over time that's engaging and that allows you to monitor how people are engaging with that content. So I just want to move it to any questions and answers, and if anyone has any questions about what we've seen or things around how HR Onboard can help you during these times.
I've got a couple here, Pete. I'll get you to answer.
Yep.
One of the ones that I had pop up is, if you had to do one thing to engage teams, which activity would you pick?
I think it has to be communication. And it doesn't matter what. I think it's more informal than formal is where we've seen and where I've felt the most effective. Whether that's just a Friday lunch get together, and in fact we do a regular Friday lunch town hall where the different functional areas update the staff. But one of the really good suggestions that came from one of our staff members was, hey, for the first 15 minutes of that town hall, can we all just talk? Like, there's no format to it. It's just a catch up. And I think that's been really important for people, particularly those who either live by themselves or, just want to shoot the breeze. And I think that's one thing that's missing from those face-to-face relationships when you're in the workplace together.
Yeah, for sure. Dance-offs aren't your favourite?
No.
We've got a 3:30 dance-off every day, which is amazing. We've been going through 60s, 70s, 80s, you name it. So fun one.
Yeah, and I think it is those informal catch-ups are what people look forward to.
Makes it a bit more fun. Yeah. A couple more here. So with so much change happening right now, what are your thoughts on introducing a new tool like HR Onboard into the mix?
Yeah, I think it depends how you introduce it. I think for a lot of people, they're going through a lot of change anyhow. So you do need to be careful about other things you're introducing. I guess something like HR Onboard is, we try and make it as frictionless as possible for employees. So it's, most of our communication goes out through text messages that links out just to a web page that you don't have to log into. So it doesn't feel like another app you need to learn. So as long as you're introducing things that are fairly frictionless for your employees and even for the people who need to drive them, which is, HR and that, I think that's okay if the benefits can outweigh some of the overhead of putting those tools in.
Okay, and one last question here is, I guess, what common mistakes are you seeing teams or leaders make?
During this time, I would think, definitely, again, looking back at what our customers are putting into some of these programs, what they are all emphasizing is the human side of the organization and the transparency of information. So I think the biggest mistake is not to provide people with information, because nature sort of doesn't like a vacuum. So I think you need to fill in the gaps, otherwise people will fill in the gaps themselves with misinformation. So it's really important to be transparent and timely with what's going on.
Perfect. That seems to be it from the question side. I think that's us done. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks so much, Pete, for all that awesome content. Really interesting topic. I mean, even I got something out of that, and I work at HR on Board, so that's kind of cool. But guys, look, jump on our website if you want to know a little bit more. We've got a resources page that you can get the coat checklist. There's some other cool stuff in there. Otherwise, give us a buzz if you'd like to have a chat about HR on Board or anything that you've seen today, even any other questions you might think of later. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Bye.